Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another edition, Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. First graphic, hazardous weather graphic. Here you can see yellow signifying winter weather advisories for snow. It's the Sitna Valley, western Kenai Peninsula, and up into the Anchorage area, over to the Palmer, Manuska Valley, and of course across portions of the Copper River Basin here, on down into the greater Yakutat area. And that's for several inches of snow, a system coming through right about now beginning, and radar echoes and snow increasing across Cook Inlet. And so it's going to be coming through tonight with the heaviest snow amounts and then begin diminishing tomorrow. And the amounts will be quite variable and varied here across the area. So some areas will see more than others, like maybe 4 to 8 inches. Others will see less than that. And then there's a winter storm warning out for heavy snow here around the Juneau-Douglas area, and then kind of back up to the northwest there for that system as well as it comes in. Look for some pretty significant snowfall amounts, especially in the upslope areas there. And then we've got advisories down over the southern part of the Panhandle, but not including Prince of Wales Island or Annette or Mount Lacatla or those areas. And back out to the west, winter storm warning here for this evening, or a portion of this evening for the Yukon Delta due to that pretty good system. It's weakening now, but still had winds gusting 40 to 50 miles an hour here. Yukon Delta, southern coast of the Seward Peninsula, creating near whiteout conditions, and still gusting upwards of 50 miles an hour over in St. Lawrence Island. And then that'll begin to improve here as that low weaken slowly pulls out. And then up to the north, another system coming up later on. We've got winter storm watches out for the north coast of the Seward Peninsula, Kobuk Valley, Selawik Valley, Noatak Valley in the northwest coast, Kotzebue, and that's out for late tomorrow into Friday. And that's for the next storm that's going to be pushing northward into the Bering Sea. Moving on to satellite imagery, here's the one that really clobbered St. Lawrence Island here on up to the Seward Peninsula with the wind and snow. And westerly winds gusting as 50 miles an hour. Pribilof Islands here on the back side of this. And some snow shower activity moving in, nothing very terribly heavy with that. And then the moisture sliding eastward here. Didn't really see any heavy amounts reported at 3 p.m., 12-hour amounts. Let's see, McGrath had a little over a tenth of an inch water equivalent, so that could have been a couple inches of snow there. Igigik, the same thing, and otherwise amounts were less, but some areas had more than that for sure. And this system beginning to spread the precipitation into the Cook Inlet area now, and mostly along the west side of Kodiak Island, and clouds all the way over past Yakutat. Not a bad day over the Panhandle. Increasing mid and high level clouds there up to the northwest, but some sunshine on down to the south. And not bad also in advance of the front, north slope into the upper Yukon Valley. As you can see, kind of splitting here. We're going to have a disturbance, separate low center develop and then pull off to the east later tonight and into tomorrow. And then back out to the west, you see the cloud shield associated with the next big storm that's already kicking the winds up a chimney at about 45 miles an hour there. And that'll continue tonight and push eastward. Otherwise, this low wound up pretty good there just south of St. Lawrence Island, but it's going to slow down and weaken, and conditions will improve in those areas. On the chars, down about 982 millibars, with the blowing snow occurring in the tighter pressure gradient here on the eastern side of the low center. The gradient in advance of this front really not all that significant, and the front's really weakening as it comes through. And downsloping winds kind of holding the snow off in Cook Inlet, especially northern Cook Inlet, on up into the Manuska Valley due to that, but it's going to be coming on through. And a little breezy, but not too bad, 25 to 35 miles an hour, areas of the eastern Alaska range. Otherwise, light winds, Copper River Basin, and also light winds over the southeast coast today. Not one line going across there except for this trough axis, which is right on top of them down there. And then back out to the west, this system just coming onto the edge of the map there, already bringing snow with 45-mile-an-hour wind gusts, as I mentioned, into Shemya. For tonight, this low really slows down, almost stops, and weakens, though, up to 995 millibars. Winds will be lighter, snowfall will be lighter, visibility is better. Still some blowing snow, more likely calling it drifting by comparison there. Ridging, drier, light winds, maybe some clearing here, Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula. And then gale and storm force winds with that next low center gradually pushing eastward and bearing down on Adak and Atka. Here's this low center that develops, pulls into the Gulf of Alaska. As that goes by, the bulk of the moisture here will come across southern Alaska. That's where we expect the heaviest snowfall amounts overnight tonight with snow advisories, and then this mess pushing into the Panhandle and the snow for the Juneau area back to the north and northwest. Hence the winter weather or winter storm warning for heavy snow. This disturbance there brings, just kind of clips the eastern Arctic coast there, particularly Kaktovik and Barter Island with these skiffs of snow, and that's about it. Otherwise, high pressure back to the northwest. Pretty good, dry, light winds over the northern interior. And this area of snowfall really just becoming a little more showery and diminishing throughout the day and into the afternoon here. Hanging up on the north side of the Alaska range there with a gradient here north to southeast. And that's going to dry it out and start to clear it out over Cook Inlet as the moisture pulls eastward. Looks like a really wet day, but not all that windy actually. But looks like rain southern southeast coast, snow east and to the north, and pretty gusty winds developing here across, well, from Kodiak Island up into Kamishak Bay. Seward looks pretty breezy and some higher gusts, but not too bad here up toward Cook Inlet. And that front pushing eastward, starting to really weaken now. The main low center kind of holding back to the north there. There's another system down here to the south that on Friday rolls right up here and hits actually a perfect spot. The track is northward at a good location to bring some pretty good winds into Adak and Atka, along with rain, snow and blowing snow again with the main front here up across southwest coast and the winter storm watch out up here over the northwest. Otherwise, different story here over the central and eastern interior. High pressure dominating the weather here with mostly clear skies, maybe some gusty outflow winds here, especially over the northern Panhandle, the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Delta. But light winds and some sunshine in the afternoon, even up along the eastern Arctic coast. Snow showers pulling off to the southeast as this takes off. This for the afternoon will be this kind of coverage, which isn't much, but it'll be a little more widespread earlier on in the day. Low temperatures down there for tonight look mid-20s to lower 30s, and right around zero for the Copper River Basin, a little below on the east side, as low as 20 below at Arctic Village, upper 20s, Bristol Bay, teens, south central Alaska. And then the highs tomorrow, upper 20s, lower 30s for south central Alaska, near 40 for Kodiak, and upper 30s, Alaska Peninsula, and near zero up to the north, and the Panhandle, lower 40s out along the coast, otherwise 30s. And then your outlook for the Friday morning lows here, a little chillier here with the clear air and the high pressure, anywhere from 15 to 25, maybe 30 below zero. But single numbers in teens, south central Alaska, 20s along the coast, 30 for Kodiak, 20s to near 30 for the southeast coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into aviation here, we've got the next storm pushing a band of IFR into the southwest Bering Sea there. And then we've got lingering IFR here from the southwest interior along the Yukon River back out to St. Lawrence Island. More widespread here with the bulk of the moisture shifting eastward over the southeast interior. It's actually all the way down across much of the Panhandle, VFR up north. That holds into the afternoon, good VFR conditions. Patch of marginal VFR there along the coast and areas. Otherwise pretty good, and big improvement here going, as you can tell. Losing the IFR, except still slowly starting to move out of the Panhandle there, but areas of VFR definitely on the increase tomorrow. And then that next system pushing IFR just to the Pribilof Islands, down across Adak, and then on into Atka during the mid-afternoon. VFR, Alaska Peninsula. And Friday morning, that system spreads into the west-southwest part of the state again, with marginal VFR streaming off to the northeast. Still have VFR to the south, VFR to the north, and from Bristol Bay across Kodiak, And the northern panhandle, IFR over the southeast part of the southeast. And then for Friday afternoon, good VFR across the southeast coast there, right up into the interior, northward to the Arctic coast, and then conditions deteriorate as you head west here, back into the IFR, Nunivak Island, southwest interior to the Bering Strait, northwest coast, right on down across the Pribilofs and to the west, and the Aleutians. And then for passes, Anatuvik, VFR tomorrow. Good day coming up for Adigan as well. Actually, both those passes, good VFR, both north and south. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, starting out IFR and then things gradually improving to kind of a marginal afternoon. And that same trend also good for Rainy Pass, IFR becoming marginal. And windy though, I think it'll just be kind of a marginal VFR kind of day through that pass without really too much variation from morning to afternoon. Isabel though, lowest conditions definitely in the morning, turning toward marginal in the afternoon. And Mentasta, same forecast, a lot of moisture hanging in the area there, but could become marginal in the afternoon. And then for Tanita, same trend, IFR to start, marginal VFR to maybe VFR in the late afternoon. And for Portage, IFR will become VFR maybe by midday. And for Chilcoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, southerly flow, of course 2,000 feet right up in almost to the eastern North Gulf Coast, but so well off the coast of the Panhandle at the surface there in over the western areas, hugging the North Gulf Coast, about like we've seen across northern Bristol Bay to north of the Pribilofs, and then 2,000 feet starting to show up there, but that's well southwest of Adak. And then icing tomorrow, next system pushing it in, just some small areas of considerable moderate rime icing here, above 5,000 or so, narrow band coming across the central Aleutians with that front, and then some lingering scattered stuff above 4,000 feet here, the light to possibly mixed variety, nothing significant. A lot more significant of this moisture right into the southeast coast, a little bit more in the way of considerable moderate icing there in that area. And for the jet stream, got an upper level low here over the eastern North Gulf Coast. Tomorrow afternoon, there's that southwest flow, 120 knots. That's driving that moisture right up into the Panhandle. And back to the west, higher pressure developing here. We got the one center up there along the northwest coast, and then ridging up over the southwest Bering. Actually, there's some pretty good winds even coming over the top of this ridge across eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and 130 knots back there to the west. And for 9,000 feet, big storm out here coming into the western Bering once again, and anywhere from 55 to 70 knot winds here out in advance of that, but falling back to about 25, St. Lawrence Island, a little gusty around this low, especially on the south side there, coast of the Yukon Delta. Easterlies at about 30-point lay, and the Panhandle kind of gusty here, 25 to 45, mostly central and southern areas, 3,000 feet northwest winds here across Kodiak, Kamishak Bay area, and 40 to 45 knots, and southwest 25 to 30 for the southeast coast, light up to the north along the Arctic coast. Good south winds here, 45 to 55 or 60 knots over the western Bering. Lots of turbulence to go with this here, southern Alaska, and also in advance of the front out over the
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Ice pretty close to St. Matthew Island, at least on this scale here, but it won't make it to St. Matthew Island due to the strong southerly winds that are going to come back in across this area over the next couple of days. So ice will continue to start increasing its retreat northward once again, start to pull off the north side of St. Lawrence Island along the southern Norton Sound coast, maybe even up on the north side of the peninsula. And there's still hunting going on, walrus hunting on St. Lawrence Island, but the walrus aren't in really good shape from what I've heard, information that had passed on to me. And then the crabbing isn't that great around St. Matthew Island due to the lack of sea ice. So moving on to coastal water forecast, west-southwesterly gales on the south coast, and then 30 to 35 knot winds on the north coast there out of the southwest. Light 15 knot southerlies for Lynn Canal, but 25 gusts 40 for Stevens Passage, and small craft advisories for southeast winds at 25 for Clarence Strait. Outlook for Friday, northwest 35 knots there with that low center. That'll be diminishing throughout the day as it pulls away. North 25, turn northeast 25 in the north coast. Northerly gales come back into Lynn Canal with 6-foot seas. Gales also for Prince William Sound tomorrow, northwest 35 knots, higher gusts for sure coming out of the bays, and west-northwest 40 knots, North Gulf Coast, Barren Islands, west 35 for Kamishak Bay, 30 knots, Southern Cook Inlet, southwest 15, north of the Forelands. And for Friday, light northeasterlies here, 10 knots, about 15 south of the Forelands, north 20 Kamishak Bay, northwest 30, coming down to 30 knots here for the Barren Islands, and north to northwest 25 for the North Gulf Coast, and 20 knot northerlies for Prince William Sound. And then for Kodiak Island tomorrow, west 30 knots, and northwest 30 over to Castle Cape, west-southwest for the peninsula at 25, and small craft advisories for Bristol Bay. Southeast 15 on Friday there for Bristol Bay, and south to southeast 25 to 30 for the Alaska Peninsula, Castle Cape on up to Sitkinak, 15 knot winds, and winds coming down to 25 knots on the east side of Kodiak. Fox Islands tomorrow, 25 to 40 knot winds out of the south, strongest back here toward Nikolsky and Unmak Island, and south 45 sustained there for the Adak-Atka area, west of Kiska, 50 knots storm warnings west of Kiska. And those turn northwest, come down to 30 knots out there on Friday. Northeast 35 gales there all the way across to Adak and Atka, but they turn south to southeast at 40 in that area. And it looks like mostly South to southeast winds 30 knots. Gales there north or northwest of Winmac Island for the eastern Aleutians. Southwest coast, west winds 25, 12-foot seas south of Nunivak Island. Southwest 30 knots, 12-foot seas north side, and then gales here for St. Lawrence Island, west 35. Winds coming up in the afternoon to 35 knots for the Pribilof, southeast increasing to 35 knots, St. Matthew Island. And then for the Friday outlook, south 35 for the Pribilofs, 20-foot seas, 22-foot seas with gale force southerlies there for St. Matthew Island, southeast 30 knots off the Kuskokwim Delta coast, south 30 knots off the Yukon coast, and then southerlies at 35, good for gales for both Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, north to northeast at 15. Same thing more or less for the central coast, picking up to 20. And then from Cape Thompson to Wales, we've got brisk wind advisories, east 25. Those kick into gale force on the next day for Friday here, all the way up to Cape Beaufort, southeast 35, east 25, brisk wind advisories on the west side, lighter winds at about 15 on the east coast. And for tonight, this low that's developing here currently, right about in this area, tracks into the Gulf of Alaska and develops even further. That's going to start turning those winds around to the north here. Snow coming across southern Alaska. Winter storm warning for Juneau with that moisture pushing in. Dry in the north. This low slowly weakens and conditions improve. Big storm out over the western Bering Sea pushes eastward tomorrow. The front does. The low kind of pulls up to the north. This low really weakening and looks pretty stormy for the southeast coast precipitation-wise and to a lesser extent wind-wise. Gusty north to northwest winds here along the North Gulf Coast of Kodiak Island, and that storm pushes northeastward here right up into the Russian Far East once again. Another one pulls up to the Aleutians for more wind, rain, and snow. Snow and blowing snow, Yukon Delta up to the Noatak Valley on Friday. By contrast, light winds and dry with a lot of sunshine here over the eastern interior, Gulf of Alaska, and the southeast coast. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.